closely about making the case against witnesses.
I do. I think they're deathly afraid of what witnesses will have to say, and so their whole strategy has been deprive the public of a fair trial. They don't frame it that way, but that's in essence it. They have a very heavy burden, though, with that because the American people understand what a fair trial is. A fair trial requires witnesses. A fair trial does not consist of the person who is charged agreeing with the judges to deprive the prosecution from being able to make a case. So it's hard to argue we don't want to hear the evidence, particularly when they say we should hear from more direct witnesses who talk to the president, but we're not going to allow them to be called. What was so striking me really about their case was that they basically acknowledge the scheme. They don't really contest the president's scheme. They don't say, no, he didn't try to get foreign help in the election. They don't say that there was no evidence that he was conditioning the aid. They just try to make the case that you don't need a fair trial here. You can make this go away. But look, if they're successful in depriving the country of a fair trial, there is no exoneration. There is no exoneration. Americans will recognize that the country did not get what the founders intended because they put the word try in the Constitution for a reason.
The other part of the president's defense is to call into question the investigators, whether it's you or the intelligence community. Jay Sekulow basically said the president has every right to question, essentially defending the idea that the president does have suspicions about Ukraine's role in 2016, going after the intelligence community. Were you surprised that the president's counsel did that on the floor of the Senate?
I was surprised. I think it was a huge mistake. Basically, what he did, and this was really following the presentation we made the day before about the threat the president poses to the country because he continues to choose to believe people like Rudy Giuliani. He continues to believe Russian propaganda over his own intelligence agencies, over his own FBI director, and that makes him dangerous to our country. And what do? They go and double down on that same crazy conspiracy theory that Ukraine hacked the DNC server. It's astonishing. And, on the first day of the president's defense to say the president should disbelieve his own intelligence agencies, has every right to believe Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't want to be making that argument.
You were also a star of their defense as well, including, I think, an exchange you and I had about the Russian collusion issue, as well as your opening statement on the phone call. Any regrets about either of those two moments yourself?
No, and I'm glad you asked the question about collusion because, again, they may be perpetuating the president's talking points, but they got it exactly wrong. Bob Mueller did not find that there was no collusion. In fact, in the first couple pages of the report, he said we don't address that issue. What we found is we could not prove criminal conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. But nonetheless, what he did find is that the Russians offered the president dirt on his opponent, and they said they would love to have it. Literally put it in writing. But the more important point, Chuck, and the relevance of the Mueller report to all this, because we're not trying the Mueller report, is that this isn't the first time that he invited foreign interference. That is the background of the current effort to get a foreign nation to help him cheat in an election. You can't say it's an accident when you repeatedly are seeking foreign help, and in this case, we proved overwhelmingly that they were leveraging hundreds of millions of dollars that Ukraine needed in military aid and a deeply sought-after Oval Office meeting to coerce Ukraine into helping him cheat.
The president's defense team also brought up the FISA issue, sort of in general, because there was a report this week that the Justice Department has now said that those renewal applications, 2 of them to survey Carter Page, lacked probable cause, should not have been authorized, and essentially I think I've tried to freeze any information that was collected around it. What's your reaction to the Justice Department new decision on that?
Well, look, for the purposes of the impeachment trial, it's a pretty remarkable argument, which is because there were flaws and serious flaws in a FISA application involving a single person, Carter Page, therefore the president has every right to disbelieve the unanimous conclusion of the intelligence agencies that Russia interfered in our last election, they're likely to interfere in the next election, and therefore the president is right to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. I don't know how one thing follows from the other, but it shows, I think, the weakness of their argument that there was some justification for the president using the power of his office to investigate his opponent. And I just don't think you can make that case persuasively to the American people.
Where are you in witness reciprocity?
Look, I think the president has the right to call relevant witnesses, just as we do, in his defense. He doesn't have the right to call irrelevant witnesses or witnesses who aren't fact witnesses.
Well, if the Senate says he does, why not? Then, I mean, that's the way the rules work. I mean, I understand where you come from, but if the Senate says he can, then he can.
Well, the Senate can make whatever decision the Senate can make, and the American people can judge that decision. But if we're talking about a fair trial, if the senators are going to give content to their oath to be impartial administrators of justice, they can't say, well, we're going to allow the president to trade witnesses that don't shed any light on the facts, but would allow him to once again try to smear his opponent. We're going to make that the pound of flesh. We're going to make that the cost of calling relevant witnesses.
If they're irrelevant, what are you afraid of? Won't that be exposed?
Well, it's not a question of what I'm afraid of. I'm not afraid of anything. The question is, should the trial be used as a vehicle to smear his opponent? Is that the purpose of the Senate trial, or is it to get to the truth? Because if it's to get to the truth, Hunter Biden can't tell us anything about the withholding of the military funding. Hunter Biden can't tell us why the president wouldn't let the president of Ukraine into the Oval Office. Hunter Biden can't tell us anything about that. And so, it's a false choice to say, well, if the House gets to call witnesses, doesn't the president? Yes, we both get to call witnesses. We both get to call relevant ones. And one other point on this, Chuck, which is important. We have a very capable justice sitting right behind me, who can make decisions about the materiality of witnesses. We trust the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice, to make those decisions. And one final thing, if you will. The president's team is pushing out the argument, we don't have time to call witnesses. We'd really love to have these people testify. We just don't have time to do it. It would be too inconvenient. That's a dodge. We have a justice who can make decisions if there's any legitimate claim of privilege. It can go to the justice.
Their argument is that it interferes in the presidential election, that we start to creep too close to it, and basically, at what point should voters have this decision versus the Senate?
Well, it's a broader argument than that. Their argument is you cannot impeach a president in his first term because it will either overturn the will of the voters who elected him or prevent him from being on the ballot the next time. Now, the remedy of impeachment, if it's to be a meaningful remedy, means that you can remove a president from office. And if a president commits serious misconduct in his first term, he doesn't get a pass. The danger of the country is particularly acute when the conduct involves threatening the integrity of the next election, because that's normally the remedy. But if he's allowed to cheat in that election, it's not a proper remedy.
What do you make of the criticism that some Republican senators who you might want to see vote for witnesses didn't like your head on a pike comment? Murkowski, Collins, and Ernst, all three Republican senators who are might be open to witnesses, thought you got too personal.
Well, I don't think it was personal to refer to the CBS story. What may be personal, though, and I think I have to be very candid about this, is I made the argument that it's going to require moral courage to stand up to this president. And this is a wrathful and vindictive president. I don't think there's any doubt about it. If you think there is, look at the president's tweets about me today, saying that I should pay a price.
You take that as a threat?
I think it's intended to be. But look, it is going to be very difficult for some of these senators to stand up to this president. It really is. There's just no question about it. And I want to acknowledge that. And I don't want to acknowledge it in a way that is offensive to them. But I do want to speak candidly about it. And if this weren't an issue, there wouldn't be an issue about calling witnesses. If we can't even get the senators to agree to call witnesses in a trial, it shows you just how difficult that moral courage is.
Well, we're going to try to have that conversation in a second. Chairman Adam Schiff, thanks for coming on, sharing your views. We'll be watching next week. Senate Republicans do seem increasingly unlikely to agree to hear any witnesses at the impeachment trial.